Stream ready. Great. 1 second. Just pulling up the agenda of today. Awesome. Is my audio okay?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Welcome, everyone. I post the agenda into the chat. Welcome, everyone. Today is December 17th. It's the 9th EIP-7928 Breakout call. And we still have something on the agenda that basically was the topic of last week, namely how long do we store block level access lists and how do we make them accessible over the engine API. If you look into the agenda, there are 3 PRs. One of them, the second one, is against the execution specs and the other 2 against the EIP. And what is proposed in there is basically that we make sure that we keep at least enough block level access lists until the weak subjectivity period. And the rationale behind this is we want to make sure that if a node goes offline for less than the weak subjectivity period and wants to catch up by re-execution, then there must be enough block level access lists around such that catching up with the head is actually feasible, because of course you might need parallelization in the context of re-execution sync. So yeah, have people had time to look into those? Especially do client teams have any opinions? By the way, I almost forgot. This also includes the topic of removing the block level access list from the block body. Yeah, I guess there's no one against that. It seems like this was the broad consensus that we reached. Also, Kareem is saying that in the chat. he's okay with removing it from the block body. I remember Gary and Jared were also advocating for removing it from the block body last week. The question that remained was only how does the ball get from the CL to the EL? So far, it has been passed from the CL via the engine API using the execution payload. And yeah, Justin Karim and me had a call with POTUS yesterday, and POTUS mentioned that the execution payload header will not be stored on the CL side anymore. So we don't have to care about the execution payload header, but we would then just put the block level access list in the execution payload. It goes to the execution layer, and the execution layer would then need to take the block level access list, hash it, and then start the state transition. And afterwards, the CL would use the hash from the provided block level access list and put it into the block header. And in the end, after execution, the EL would compare the generated block level access list that was generated during execution with the block hash. And if this check matches, it means that the block level access list was actually exactly the same that was derived during generation. So this would make sense. This also means that we have to store at least 15.7 days of block level access lists. This is around, yeah, you can think of it as a max of 10 GB. Doesn't fit into memory anymore. Great. Then we can, I guess, if there's no opinion on that, I would interpret that as consensus here, because it feels like we already reached that point in the GitHub in the Discord discussion. So just wanted to bring it up again, that everyone is on the same page. What does this actually mean for our tests? Maybe Rahul or Felipe, do we have to change a lot there now?
Yeah, that's a good question. Since the block access list is no longer in the block body, I think we need to include them in the vector somewhere else, just to have a reference to it. And we'll have to figure out how to arrange that.
Yeah, it's interesting. What is like the starting point from the tests? Because we start basically at the EL block and not at the execution payload, right? Because the execution payload would basically be everything passed from the CL, which is a lot of header fields, plus the withdrawals, if I remember correctly, execution requests and the transactions itself. Or maybe do you know, Jochen, how we are treating this, or what would be the cleanest way to implement that in the testing framework?
Sorry, what specifically implementing?
The fact that the block level access list is not part of the block body anymore. So yeah.
So where's this currently then part of?
So it comes from the CL as part of the execution payload.
Right. To be honest, I don't really know. I think we have to, I will check how the blobs are basically handled, because this is somewhat similar. At this point, I would not know.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we even need it, if we even need to change something at the tests there, for example, this is a question to you, Felipe. Are the test cases, are each individual test case also checking that the bal is correct, like doing a hash check at the end?
Yeah, yeah. So obviously, so we also have like the engine version of the tests, right? And these don't actually have the full bal. This will take just the block access list hashed. And so honestly, I think for debugging purposes, it's really nice to have them in these test vectors. But if they're going to be, if we're going to have the hash that's proposed, then I think this may be all we need. It's just not going to be ideally very debuggable, which is not, yeah, it's not ideal while we're in like such a large testing phase.
Right, I can see that, yeah. Because the workflow would then look like the following. The CL would pass the execution payload to the EL. In the execution payload, there is the full bal, and you would then hash the bal. And this is basically where we are currently starting, right? Except that we have both the hash and the bal. And now we would basically only have like the hash. We would then run execution, would derive generated bal, would hash it and compare it with the hash in the header. Yeah, this is interesting because it's like the bal provided by the CL does never need to enter the state transition function on the EL, because the EL, like if you execute transactions, you will just generate the bal for validation, but you never need to have the provided bal enter the system in that sense, because it will just be used to parallelize, and in the end we need a hash of it at least in the header to make sure we can actually validate it during execution. So the bal from the CL should also never enter the test cases, but I can see the argument why it makes sense for debugging.
So I just checked, like it seems that for the blobs, so just to compare that, because in the blobs, it seems that in the test format, indeed, the blobs themselves are not provided, but the blob versions hashes are provided, of course, in the block. So yeah, in this case, the debugging would be harder. But of course, like this is like the end result. Like if we would remove it from the block body, then it's indeed, as you say, like not part of the state transition function. So this is like a logical result. But for the debugging purposes, if we think this is wanted, then I think we should feedback this in general to the testing framework, that we somehow need like this data to also help debugging this. But this is then part
Right.
of how we test this. Yeah.
So then we could either have like an optional field in the state transition function or something in the specs. Are you thinking along those lines?
So it will be more part of like the testing framework itself, how this will be handled in the testing format. So indeed, as you say, like this optional fields, like maybe like this metadata or something, that you include the full block access list, which is optional, because in the end, the EL client will only verify that the hash of this thing is correct. And for debugging, we would of course need the expected block access list. So this will be more part of like the testing framework. So we need like some kind of how you would fill these tests. You would need some kind of endpoint at the EL or debug endpoint to get the expected block access list in order to include this in the testing format. So in the fixture which the clients would consume when testing this.
Okay, yeah, this sounds better than what I was thinking of. Awesome, thank you. Yeah, this seems like this is something we need to figure out, like, because we can't we can't lose this nice feature of having like good debug logs that compare them.
Yeah, I think what we should do here is to also look a little bit back in how the blobs were tested, because I think this is somewhat similar. Because I also don't see like the blobs in the fixtures themselves. So I'm not really sure if that was a problem back then, how this was actually tested. But
Yeah,
I think this will be, yeah, sorry.
blobs are different, I think, because they don't really interact with execution. So we probably never had like a script that compared two blobs with one another, right? You would probably have many tests for how you create a blob, but then on a testnet, I don't know actually, but I would assume we did not compare blobs with one another in the tests.
Yeah, that would actually make sense. Yeah. Okay, let me think about this a little bit, how we should approach this if we change this. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thank you. Is there anything else we should discuss under this topic of specs and testing updates?
Maybe I can about this discussion. Are we talking about changing the JSON format for the test? I feel that current format is fine. I'm not sure why we need to change it. I'm not understanding that point.
Yeah. So if the block access list gets removed from the block body itself, the blocks part of the vectors would no longer have this like block access list field, right? And I think what we're just trying to discuss is it's super useful for debugging.
Yeah,
And maybe it can perhaps be like an underscored field or something that says like, this is not part of the actual block body, but this is like useful information for testing. And I think, yeah, I agree with Joachim that like somewhere, like if we decide we want to keep this for debugging, somewhere in some metadata section, it might be really useful to just keep it around. So,
I would even just leave it like that because you have additional fields, RLP or something like that, that is basically we have a need to have special type to decode the JSON block that's inside the JSON. So we don't care if it's underscored, if it is named something else, or if it is named block access list ball or whatever. Okay, thanks.
yes, yeah, that makes sense. I was looking at the RLP just now as well, and
Yeah, it's special
yeah,
format. It's special, like it's not, you cannot use block to deserialize that kind of JSON. You need special type that's going to do that. But yeah, I think that's like, okay, it's small decision.
yeah, it's a small decision. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, we can also resolve that topic async afterwards, after looking deep into it, like what is the most efficient and clean way to still get like the logging, but on the other hand, we also don't want the specs to deviate from what client should actually do. Any other opinion on that? Also on the other topic of the retention period. So there are two topics now. The ball being removed from the block body, stored separately, and then secondly, the retention period of 3,533 epochs, which is like a little more than 2 weeks. Perfect. Then I guess we can move on to the next topic. Let me quickly check. that there's nothing in the chat neither. Looks good. Perfect. Then the last update on the agenda that we have today is client updates on optimizations. We can combine it with, in general, client updates. Client updates on optimizations is very specific because, as discussed a few weeks ago, we need certain optimizations also for the repricing work that is going on for Amsterdam. So, for example, in order to get reliable benchmarks for the repricing, we at least need a client, or better, multiple clients that have parallel execution implemented and parallel I/O, because those would then inform us, especially on the state-related pricing, and people are blocked by that for doing benchmarks for the repricing. Is there any work going on? I remember like there were clients that were already working on parallel I/O. Maybe someone could give an update.
For example, on Bezo, so we have the parallel execution implemented. So it's we are doing some tests currently. For the parallel I/O, as I said, it's not yet implemented. We didn't have time for the moment, but it depends on when we will start the Devnet. But I think we will be able to have something ready for the next Devnet, in my opinion.
Awesome, thank you. And when we say parallel I/O, we mean this parallel batch I/O where you load everything in one go, basically, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, yeah, because I also refer to it as parallel I/O, but I think parallel batch I/O or batch I/O might be even more accurate, just to not mix things up.
But
Any other? Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say it depends when we want to start this Devnet, because there is some vacation, etc. So yeah, I don't know when it will be ready, but
yeah, what's your plan, Stefan? Maybe you can give a small update on how we're doing
Yeah, sure.
there.
So it seems that clients are much more stable now, which is really, really nice. So the critical path, most clients seem to agree on now, which is great. We can start the Devnet 1, I think, today or tomorrow even. But unfortunately, there are like holidays coming up and most people won't be doing much. But I mean, if that's not a problem, we can, and if some people are working through the holidays, I can go ahead and start Devnet 1. But if most people will say like, no, probably not really worth it, we can also do it beginning of January straight after. I'm open to that. Both is fine with me.
Yeah, so from an Aragon perspective, we're in a bit of a strange place in that we're quite well advanced with optimizations, but we're not passing Hive tests, basically. So we've got two optimization tasks going on at the moment. One is execution optimization, and the other is parallelizing our commitment calculation. I think the execution parallelization and the kind of parallel I/O, we're just testing at the moment, and probably by the end of this week we'll have a first version of it. Now, when we're ready from a Bowles Devnet perspective, I mean, it is dependent on getting the Hive tests that are failing at the moment passing, which I'm also showing. Basically, I spoke to him before the call, and he's expecting that to get fixed by the end of this week. If he doesn't, because I'm working at least part of next week, I'll switch from doing the optimization work that I'm working on to actually just getting us through the Hive testing. So I think probably by by the week between Christmas and New Year, I think we should have both of them completed. If that makes sense.
Awesome. Yeah, with both of them, you now meant parallel execution and parallel post-state root calculation, right? Or was the
Well,
second?
so parallel execution, parallel. What we're doing is parallel execution, parallel state calculation, right, and parallel IO. There are kind of three pieces, and our latest iteration of the code runs all three of those things in parallel with each other, and also execution and commitment calculations are parallel themselves, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, okay, I think I gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can think of the parallel batch IO as basically a process that just goes through the BAL, fetches everything into cache while the
Yeah.
execution is already like starting.
Yeah, and the commitment calculation is also starting. And effectively,
Okay, perfect.
the way that it works is whichever of those three processes gets to read the data first will read it, with the expectation that the data fetcher will get there before the other two, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, this makes sense.
Yeah. Because given we start fetching data when, as soon as we get the block, by the time we get to the other parallel processing, the assumption is that we'll have everything cached by then. If for any reason we haven't, we'll go and get it during that parallel process. And then we'll see how fast all that goes.
Perfect.
Yeah. I mean, I think
Awesome.
the slight problem that we've got is we really need to be on the BAL's testnet to get any decent data out of those benchmarks, because we need the BALs in order to actually have like perfect parallel execution. See what I mean?
Yeah, I can see that. Okay, yeah, thanks a lot for the update.
Yeah, maybe just to chime in on the benchmarks and the testing. We are currently also working on benchmarks which are specifically targeted for the block level access lists. And for these, what we do is we create benchmarks which have transactions which you cannot execute parallelized, because these transactions interact with each other. So with these benchmarks, you should see that if you use the block level access list correctly, then you can actually parallelize those. And if you don't use block level access list, then you have to execute these transactions sequentially. So this should also be part of like the benchmarking effort, that you can really see, okay, does it work or does it not work? Because also for these devnets, like if you have a very optimistic, or not very optimistic, but like a somewhat optimistic prefetcher, where you just start all transactions, where you start on the pre-state of the current block, then in most cases, I would say, and I think Tony also has this nice site where you can see like the interactions of these transactions, like most transactions don't actually interact with each other. So if we would, I would say somewhat naively look at the block level access list result on mainnet blocks, then we can already somewhat parallelize those. But of course, we want to see like the actual effort if we want to create some blocks where you have to execute these transactions sequentially if there is no block level access list. And when there is a block level access list, you can actually execute this parallelized. And then you can see if you have implemented this correctly, because this should in the end lead up to like, close to the amount of threads which you run as a kind of speed up factor. So just wanted to share that this is an effort for the benchmarking part of this.
Yeah, so just on that, it's kind of on mainnet at the moment, we get like a 2.5 parallelization factor by just running parallel execution with no BALs. So I'm not sure whether what you're talking about is the difference between serial execution and BALs, or the difference between running let's call it non-BAL parallelization, where you get interactions. Now, obviously,
Yes.
if you create a block where everything's dependent on everything else, it will become serial, basically.
Yes, but the key point of the block level access list is that you can now have the pre-state of the transaction.
Yeah.
You can read this from the block access list. So that is when you can actually use the block level access list to know what the pre-state is before like any transaction of the block. And then you can use that to parallelize the transaction. And if you would not have the block level access list, then this is not possible because you would need to execute the previous transactions in order to execute the current transaction because you need to pre-state.
Only if there's a dependency.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So these benchmarks, they create these tests where without a block level access list, you cannot execute them, well, how you would execute them now, like parallelized, because then you would end up with a different state route than if you would execute them sequentially.
Yeah, I understand it as essentially as a worst case for today scenario. Basically, it would force you to sequential execution today, and with block level access list, you should get to parallel execution, and then you should like see a steep drop in execution time. Would be interesting to think about, okay, could we have similar scenarios for I/O and the post-state route calculation? I would assume like I/O is just doing as many S loads as possible. We have benchmarks on that. And parallel state route probably doing as many S stores as possible, which we should also have. Because those will be interesting to test even with block level access list afterwards. Like, what is the worst case? Is it like a block that is well parallelizable because every block is parallelizable, but has a lot of overhead when it comes to post-state route, or is it I/O? This is still something we have to figure out, and also depends a lot on how we do the repricing in the end. Awesome. Any other client team that has an update on how is it going and how is it going, especially with regards to the optimizations?
For Nethermind, made some good progress on the parallel transaction execution and state route computation. Haven't started on the batteries yet. Also just fixing issues. So it seems like we're passing all of the RLP tests for the new release, and just checking out the engine tests as well. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much. Any other client team with an update that we forgot that we didn't cover so far?
From red side, parallel state route is in progress, and parallel execution is, I think, Matt started working on it. Yeah, we had one bug with self-destruct with the last ball 2.0 test that I fixed. And yeah, that's it.
Great, thank you very much. Did we forget any client team now? Is someone from Geth here? Otherwise, we can also check async. Doesn't look like it. Yeah, never mind. Right, is there any other topic we should discuss today? I would say we definitely would be great if we decide, should we launch the Devnet pre the holidays? I saw Stefan ask that question in the chat. It feels like it might be worth to do so. What's your feeling, Stefan?
I think I can go ahead with the clients that are running smoothly, and it's not a problem to add clients later as well. As soon as you're ready, I can deploy that. It's just not good to start with too little clients that are stable.
Right. Which clients are stable right now? I saw it's Ref and Nimbus EL, right?
Yeah,
and
what I
Besu?
wrote in the beginning, Gas, Ref, Nethermind, and Nimbus are running pretty smoothly at the moment, and Besu just has one issue with the call. that they're fixing so far. And Aragon, I'm still waiting on the BAL Devnet 1 branch to try that out.
Awesome. Yeah,
but
this sounds
maybe
like it
to
might be
phrase
worth
it-
it, huh?
To phrase it differently, is there any client that will benefit from having the Devnet up over the holidays?
Yeah, seems like we're still very early and we have time. So I'm also fine with delaying the Devnet and then making sure we have the BAL block body separation already implemented. And same for the retention period and that kind of things. I'm wondering for client teams, like how much work is this in addition to store BALs on disk and keep some of them in memory, which might be needed for syncing.
Yeah, I also kind of agree with Barnabas. We shouldn't change too much now, and just have
No, I
something
wouldn't
running
change it now.
also.
Yeah, I wouldn't change it now. It was more like we could ship a DevNet with the version as is, and so with exactly what you mentioned earlier, where clients are already like interrupting, and then because in the end it's a small change to move the BAL out from the block body. It's just not something we have dealt with in the past, so it's more like I guess complexity on the testing side and so on. And definitely should not go in a devlet that we would want to launch before the holidays.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So in this case, it feels like we will launch a devlet before the holidays. So what's the outcome now?
Yeah, I think we can do it. I think we should go ahead. Otherwise, we can just then, with the changes, launch another DevNet as well.
Exactly, yeah. We can then launch another devlet later. It won't, also those changes won't affect like the smaller, more difficult details of the EIP, like what content the BAL should have. Great. Yeah, this was basically the last agenda point we had for this week. It seems like, to summarize what we covered today, we have broad agreement on both topics of the retention period being the weak subjectivity period of around 3,500 epochs, a little more, and that we separate the block level access list from the EL block. It travels through the execution payload via the engine API. And yeah, this is basically what we covered today. Anything else someone wants to bring up or discuss before we wrap up? Jochen, yeah?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, to repeat Karim from chat. He said, because I'm also not sure if the chat is in the stream or not, so it's nice for the thing afterwards. But he says, could we also in the testnet having the two nodes configuration with and without the block level access list? I think this is a very good point, because then we can see like the impact with the block level access list which I have on the performance. Because I think at some point, like we have the implementation, so the spec of the block level access list, but this also implicitly means that clients have to implement this parallelization. And I think like as a good measurement, it's also nice to have like these two kind of nodes on the testnet. And also as a verification that these block level access lists are implemented correctly in terms of the optimizations and the parallelization of it. So just wanted to mention that. Nice point from Karin. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think we discussed it at some point on the sixth or seventh breakout call, where clients basically agreed that every client will have like a flag implemented for do we actually use the read values for batch IO or don't we make use of them? And this will then later help us to determine the impact of the reads or of the state locations onto the performance. Perfect. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. Awesome. Any more topics before we wrap up? Seems like it's not the case. Then I would say we wrap up earlier today and see each other on the next breakout call in 2 weeks. Thanks, everyone.
See you. Bye-bye.